I'm Adrian Lacey, and I'm the producer for Space Junkies at Ubisoft Montpellier.
So let's talk about this game. How long have you been developing, and how long has this idea been out there at Ubisoft?
The idea. So we started about, I think it was like 3 years ago when we first had a couple ideas. We started messing around with like the DK2s. We started looking at sort of VR in general, just started playing with stuff. And then we were just working through what are the challenges in VR, how can we get people to fly around, and then obviously with the controllers and stuff that started coming through, we had those like the hands. So once we had the hands, we were like, okay, what about, what would it be like to have guns, being able to shoot in different directions, having swords, shields, all that kind of stuff, and that's how it just started growing.
One thing that came up during our play session that I thought was really interesting is that along with developing a game in VR, you're developing an engine in VR. Can you talk a little bit about the engine?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our engine's Bridget. I mean, in VR, you have other challenges because, you have to have a high frame rate to have extra comfort. You have sort of the body, it's you. You're like a living emoticon now. So it's really important that we develop sort of features that were specific to it, like our human IK. But also working in VR, so level designers, artists, and stuff like that. Normally they're used to working on a flat screen. Now but in VR you've got this sort of spherical space, so you have this sense of scale, and you have depth, and you have all this kind of different stuff. So we actually developed a VR editor for us, so people could work in VR and they could really get a sense of where they're looking, lines of sight, and that verticality and spatial awareness. And I think that's one of the big moves that we had to make early on.
When I hear you talk about your game and also play the game, it reminds me of Quake. And Shacknews was founded as a Quake fan site. The folks at Quake.
Well, if it's any consolation, because we're a slightly older team. I won't say we're old, but we're a slightly older team, and they still play a lot of Quake.
It shows in the game, and it also shows in the idea that you're building an engine alongside the game, and that probably gives you a step up when it comes to design of the actual gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really early on in VR, we saw a lot of things that were quite slow or static. So, you had like the duck hunting kind of games where things would shoot and you could shoot. And they were cool because you had that sense of sort of space and whatever. But we wanted to do something fast, and and really flighty. We wanted like, a bit jumpy, a bit edgy. So I think that's one of the choices we made. So we want to fly fast, so you've got that navigation, that grab objects, and then shooting. And I think it was that we wanted to find that sort of speed and sort of skill.
So let's talk about the gameplay and the locomotion in it. It's kind of look-based. You're using the HMD for part of the locomotion. Then on top of that, you're using thumbstick, but it's not teleportation-based. Talk about how important it was to not make a shooter that was teleportation-based.
Well, for us, we make games where you sort of explore worlds or you fly around and stuff. And once you're teleporting and flying, you lose that sort of fantasy. So one of the big things was, how do we deal with locomotion? Originally, people were like, oh, it's really tricky, whatever. But one of the designers, what we said straight away was, well, that's an input. If you look at the HMD, it's actually an input. So it's like a controller. So looking where you want to go was quite a natural step. Plus, early VR, people were always talking about 360. But how often you look behind you? You just don't. Really, you're in front there, and you sort of glance left or right or up down. So having that sort of dynamic as an input was really more natural than worrying about how often I'm going to look behind me. So that was a couple of the steps that we did. And then in terms of controls, well, it's still keeping those sort of recognizable first-person shooter controls as well. And I think it's that combination that sort of works in VR.
It's funny because I feel like it's so important that you feel like you're floating the whole time. There's no, when you jump, there's not like a thud. I think Quake, when you were running around, you also felt like you were kind of floating. How did you guys nail that, where you're able to move up and down, where the person is sitting in a chair or they're standing playing VR? How did you do that where you're not breaking immersion? Is it something about that floating mechanic that makes people suspend belief?
Well, I think because your legs aren't walking. You don't have that sort of that feeling that your legs aren't moving anywhere. So you've got that, you're that kind of that body that's floating above in microgravity, as it were. And I think that makes it much more accessible because you have your body, you see your arms, you see your hands, but you also can look down and see your legs. Because they're not walking, you don't break the immersion. I think if we were to put something on the floor, you'd have to have the legs really walking, and that has other implications because they have to be very natural for your brain. Otherwise, you end up creating problems for vection and stuff like that and locomotion. So we were very cautious about that. But generally, it's like microgravity. You can spin stuff, drop stuff. I think in a lot of games where you know your gun, if you drop it, it's on the floor, and then you're like searching around on the floor. In microgravity, it gives the player enough time to just re-grab it or spin it in the air because it's sort of soft and floats around. So it's that feeling that we wanted to give to the player, and it gives him or her like more control in passing things, and it's a bit more toned down.
You know, and you're talking about hand presence, you know, and all of that. You have a vast array of weapons. You know, I think I tried this out at OC4 previously. That was the last build I tried out. There's a lot of weapons here and a lot of two-handed weapons. So talk about the balance that's required and the design iteration that's required to make a shotgun feel good when you're reloading.
Well, I mean, from a weapon point of view, that two-handed feel, having your hands was really important. And it's quite a natural thing. You've always seen shotguns on TV or whatever, and you shoot. And it's quite rewarding when you're doing it, especially when you're flying around at speed. So those are the things that we really wanted to give to the player. Loadings are really different because normally it's just an animation in a traditional shooter. It's just an animation cycle, but now it's one-to-one. It's you. So you're actually loading the gun, so the speed that you're doing something. And we found that quite an interesting dynamic to give to the player, which they've never had before. So I think that's one of the big things. Plus, we can do fun things like natural slingshots. We have like a nuclear slingshot, so you really hold it and you're aiming like a slingshot. Or your guns, you're sort of like a cowboy, a space cowboy, so you can spin your weapons and stuff like that, which is really rewarding. So.
And then, you know, adding to that immersion, you have more like hand emotion. You know, I was raising the roof when I won that one game. So there's all sorts of cool stuff you can do. And then even in the lobbies, you've created like a way for people to express themselves, right?
Yeah, I think VR. One of the things is that sense of presence is really important, and we see a lot of people. You know, even just doing that is massive communication tool that we take for granted a lot of the time. But even waving, and you know, in games, some people like to talk, some people don't like to talk. But it's weird how people will just give you a thumbs up, you know, and so they might not want to join in a conversation, but they'll give you some kind of natural feedback, or they'll nod their head or shake their head. And I think that's really cool in VR that we never really had before. And I think it's one of the unique things that it brings to the table. That social interaction is incredible.
So, curious, what platforms is this game going to be available on, and when is this going to come out already?
Right. Okay, so it's out the 26th of March. That's it. So it's definitely coming. We have a live beta, the open beta on the 21st. So that's what we'll do. It comes out on Oculus Rift, Vive, WinVR, and PSVR.
Awesome. And you know, something we also were talking about during the play session, there's going to be a spectator kind of mode. Can you talk a little bit about how you thought about maybe streaming this game?
Yeah, so a lot of the things today is people want to be, you know, there's a lot of streamers who want to put stuff out and put content out of their own and mess around. I mean, obviously you've got all that expression as well, so they're going to play with it and do stuff. So we thought very early on to do like a caster mode because we're in VR arcades today and for tournaments. So obviously you can see how people are playing and what have you. So we developed this sort of it's kind of like you're a video DJ. So it allows you to be a fifth player in the session and basically move camera angles, and you can like take different modes like a third person camera or a first person or a selfie mode and stuff like that. So it's just to give streamers something to play with and something that they can show content in a different way and create their own content.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time.
Cool. Thank you very much.